Welcome to the History and Urgent 9 podcast. I'm your editor, Brendan. Thank you so much for being here today. Author Gareth Harney, A History of Ancient Roman 12 Coins. I should say, there's a lot of books where it's a history of blank in this many whatevers, and a lot of times I do not like this format. Gareth's book is actually one of the exceptions. It makes sense. He is an ancient coin collector. It's some really cool stuff that we talk through, and it just makes sense for Rome because coinage was so important to it. So yeah, it's going to be two guys talking the history of ancient Rome, but I had an awesome time. I think you're going to enjoy listening to it. So how about I shut up? Let's do it. And here we are with author Gareth Harney, A History of Ancient Rome in 12 Coins. Gareth, thank you so much for coming on.
Hi, Brendan. Thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I didn't want to do this, but I don't know if you know this, if you're on the internet enough. You and I are officially a cliche. We are two guys talking about ancient Rome.
Now we are, I guess, yeah. But apparently there's millions of others out there just like us as well. So hopefully they can all identify. We're all doing it in secret or in public. We'll just do it in public.
Oh, men.
How could you not? Anyway, I mean, what better way to spend your time than talking ancient Rome? I mean, I'm thinking about it every day. I might as well talk about it with you as well.
Your entry into this is pretty cool. So you are a coin collector. First, I want to start this off, right? Because history nerds have the same problem, right? Oh, that's not cool. Coin collecting, history nerddom, stamp collecting. How did you get into it? Kind of sell me. If some young kid's listening to this and thinking, I want to get into coin collecting, but I don't think anyone's going to think that's cool. What would you say to that kid?
I would say you're very lucky as a young person if you have those role models in your life that help you realize that it doesn't matter whether it's cool or not. You know, there's a beautiful heritage with coin collecting of grandparents, of parents, passing these beautiful, wonderful historic objects onto the younger generation and imbuing them with a sense of wonder and respect for the past and of a discovery of history that comes with these coins. And I was very lucky to have that position myself when my father collected coins when I was young. And he had this cabinet in the house that was an object of fascination for me in the corner that I was not allowed to touch. But every now and then, we delve into it and he would put these objects of fascination, into the palm of my hand. And eventually one day, he decided I was ready to have one of them for myself. And he explained the history and the antiquity of this object to me, but I was a little bit too young to understand the full weight of history behind the object. But that was my entry point, my father really trying to bring history to life for me. I was also lucky in that I grew up in a very historic place in Wales and in the south of England with lots of castles, with Stonehenge, with the Roman baths in the city of Bath, lots of ruins to explore. So then having this coin placed in my hand, this beautiful handmade object that was contemporary with those ruins, that was 2,000 years old, was made by a Roman, was in the ground and had its discovery and modern journey as well through history. Those things just absolutely grabbed my imagination. But it did take a few years before I had the wherewithal and the interest and the capacity to start building my own collection. But I think for any young person, and the educational power of coins for parents as well, I just think it's unparalleled to be able to place something so ancient, but actually so relatively common as well, into the hand of a young person.
What is the coolest coin that you currently own? I'm going to say coolest. You can define that however you want. I'm not asking most expensive. I don't want somebody to rob you based upon this podcast.
Oh, don't worry. There's not many that are too expensive. I wish there was. I'm not an oil baron. This is one thing that I think is also another incredible aspect of ancient coins, just leading off that first question, is that, I was a school teacher for many years. And even if I say so myself, I've got a pretty respectable collection of coins that I'm very, very proud of. You do not have to be Getty or, a Saudi sheikh to be collecting ancient coins. Ancient coins were minted in the hundreds of millions, if not by the billion. They survive in their millions. They are the most, certainly in Europe, of course, and in Britain and in the Middle East, you probably can't walk, a few feet without knowing that there is an ancient coin under your feet somewhere. They are everywhere, all across the Empire of Rome and beyond. Ancient coins are everywhere, and they'll continue to be discovered in the most surprising ways, probably until the end of time. Of course, everything's gone up in price, but when I started out, you could get lovely coins for 10, 20, the equivalent of $50. You could get a beautiful coin. So, these things are accessible.
All right, what's your coolest one?
Well, let me tell you about a couple, and then I'll pick one. I've got a beautiful coin of Hadrian that was found in a Roman well nearby me, and it was studied by the local archaeologists, and it was documented. And we have a fantastic system in England and Wales whereby once these things are documented and the museums have logged them all and photographed them, we have the portable antiquities scheme, that marks exactly where everything was found. But after that, if it's no longer needed anymore, it's sold off to the public. And I've got a beautiful Roman coin that was found not too far away from where I live and found in a known Roman well, which I just love that idea that was sitting there for thousands of years, or someone, cast that coin into a well 2,000 years ago. Not so different to the way people do today. One of the most amazing things about ancient coins is that you never know who might have collected that item in the past. And I do say in the book that you could have a coin from a British king and it wouldn't actually be that much of a crazy thing. So, for example, George III had a gigantic collection of antiquities and coins. A lot of them went to the British Museum afterwards to form their collection. But American listeners will be very interested to know that the presidential Adams family, especially John Quincy Adams, was a very, very enthusiastic ancient coin collector. And in the 1970s, John Quincy Adams' coin collection was auctioned off to the public. And everywhere you always find Adams collection coins. And I've got a beautiful coin of probably my favorite emperor. We might talk about that later, but Emperor Trajan, with a lovely dark toning from a wooden cabinet, having been in a lovely mahogany cabinet for a couple of centuries. And I know from the trail of documentation and early photographs that was in John Quincy Adams's collection.
Well, Gareth, before we even start recording, I had told you my review for this book is there is a lot of books out there that are a history of blank in blank. It seems like people are taking articles that are just lists and turning them into books. Mm-hmm. And I found for that a lot of them, you're stretching this idea too far.
Yes, a bit tenuous.
Whereas with your book, you make the point, and I think it's really well done, is that for Rome, this is perfect to look at it in coins. Because as you discussed, coins are the first time somebody, or perhaps only time somebody would see a picture of their leader. But also, these coins were made because something huge happened. It's not like the way American thinks right now. It's like the quarter looks like the quarter. It's going to continue to look like a quarter.
And it always will, yeah.
Whereas with Rome, something big happened. A new coin was coming out. I don't know. It was almost like a new Pokemon. I don't know how they work.
It's a great analogy.
So did it hit you right away when you were coming up with the idea for the book? Like, hey, this actually kind of works perfectly. Was this like suggested to you? How did the actual bits and pieces of the book come together?
Yeah, well, you're totally right about that coins punctuated Rome's rise and fall, from power. In fact, the downfall just as much as the rise, which is something that really occurred to me as I was writing and was very helpful to me. It was a quick realization for me that you could go all the way through Roman history and have a coin at every step of the way that told whatever story was going on. You're completely right. Coins were used as direct line to the Roman people from the state, and there's not many artifacts you can think of that do that. Of course, there's public inscriptions, things like that are usually unique and in museums, as they rightly should be. But coins were the first mass media. But when we think about the printing press or the internet, those two things are often conflated as the two biggest moments of mass media production in human history. Well, I would argue that ancient coins should be the first form of mass media that we think of in that conversation. This was a way that a leader could, within a few weeks, could get a message out to the tens of millions of people across his empire. For example, we know that coins traveled very quickly. There's coins in the ruins of Pompeii that were minted probably only a week or a few weeks before in Rome and were already out and proliferating and traveling. So coins were so many things to the Roman people, as I say in the book. They were news. They were certainly a cultural touchstone. This is where you got your fashions, your hairstyles. You saw the latest emperor and empress as well. So, women were very interested in the appearances and the latest fashions and chic individuals on their Roman coins. There were, of course, state propaganda, which is fascinating to look at in its own right today as a historian. And they were an imperial kind of engine room, really, that mint in Rome, in central Rome, could get out these, whether it was a war that was won and you wanted to get that propaganda out straight away, or a war that was lost and you wanted to pretend it was won. Like you said, this was a way you could very, very quickly reach the populace. My book begins with the first silver coin struck in Rome. They did strike bronze coins for, a century or so before, very rough, large bronze coins. But the first silver coin struck in Rome, at a mint in central Rome, was the founding myth of Rome with, lo and behold, the she-wolf on that coin. And from that first coin, you can pretty much chart an unbroken line all the way through the rise of the Republic, through the Punic Wars, to the first denarius that was struck just as Hannibal was defeated, really. And their storytelling power is immense. Not only do they show you the faces of the ancient past, but they show you the priorities of those leaders.
What was the easiest chapter for you to write, right? Because Rome, you're talking about so many years. It's impossible to be an expert on every single section of it. Everyone has their favorites, right? So which chapter did you're like, oh, I already know how to write this. I'll have to, cite my sources, but I could do this from my head. Which chapter was that for you?
Yeah, so, it has to be the variety of coins surrounding the events of the Ides of March and the assassination of Caesar. This is something I'd written about online and tweeted about and done I'd done a live tweet of the Ides of March one year, which was great fun, going through minute by minute and collating all the sources together to really almost like, a crime documentary or something to bring that day to life. But it's an incredible moment in history, not just for the seismic events of the assassination of Caesar, but this is a single day from history, just like a Pearl Harbor or a D-Day, a single day from history that we can reconstruct with quite forensic accuracy. Most remarkable thing about it is that coins here, I say in the book, they help tell the story, but this is also a moment where coins became the story. A huge part of that day and the reasons that Caesar had to die in the eyes of Brutus and Cassius and the senatorial elite was that in January 44 BC, we know that Caesar placed his living face on a coin, as I said earlier. That coin, of course, survives today. Very soon after doing that, just a few weeks later, you can see the escalation of Caesar's quest to complete dominance. Whether or not he was going to declare himself a Rex, we don't know for sure. But you can see his path to complete dominance through his coins. The Western Mediterranean did not put living people on their coins, the Roman powers. I say that because in the East, Eastern Hellenistic kings did after Alexander the Great. It was pretty normal in the East to celebrate your living leader on coins, but the Roman Republic certainly did not. And Rome was no city of kings and was very proud of that idea. And your face on a coin came with the message that you saw yourself as a king. So there's a lot of underlying currents towards Caesar doing that and what that would have communicated to the people that he was contemporary with. But there's this confluence of incredible coin types around 44 BC where that chapter that I knew I had to cover, of course, with the face of Caesar, is then complemented in the most infamous way in the next chapter. To answer your question, I'll collate two of these chapters together in that Caesar dies, I think, very much directly because he put his face on a coin. Of course, there's lots of other arguments around it, but when you see these endless documentaries about the Ides of March, I'm always amazed that one of the sources they do not mention is his coins, and he's talked about in ancient sources directly as well. But it comes with the greatest ironies. Of course, Caesar dies in an incredibly violent way in the Ides of March, 44 BC. Brutus is one of the ringleaders of the assassins, which might have numbered up to 50 or 60 men. This incredible scale of this assassination is quite hard for us to behold. But within 2 years, a lot of people might have seen this coin. Brutus puts his own face on a coin as well to make his case. He's been chased out of Rome. He's had to retreat to the lands of the East to try and gather his forces to come back and retake the Republic that he feels is his legacy. He came from an incredibly ancient family, and in fact, his distant ancestor was no less than the founder of the Republic, Lucius Junius Brutus. So there was an incredible weight on Brutus's shoulders to be seen as this liberator, this person who was going to rescue Rome. And we hear of the people putting graffiti all around the city, pressuring Brutus to action. It must have been incredible pressure on him, which I do cover in the chapter. And again, try and bring that to life to try and show that story, what it must have been like for him. But again, the only time we see Brutus's face is on his infamous coin, and he strikes a coin to justify why he killed Caesar. And it's that incredible Ides of March coin. Your listeners may have seen it with the two daggers that did for Caesar on the reverse. And in fact, they're probably the two daggers of Brutus and Cassius, his close compatriot in the deed. And they're flanking a felt cap, a small cap that you would place on the head of someone being freed from slavery, a small pileus cap. And you have this most amazing scene on this coin. It's cryptic, but it's also incredibly revealing. This is what it was for. It was to place the cap of liberty on the head of the entire republic, to free them from this quote unquote tyrant. And it's just the most remarkable coin. So in partnership with the coin that showed the audience Caesar's face and Caesar dying, and then this other coin that justifies the act. But those two chapters were very fun to write, very easy to write. Again, there's other coins in the mix there as well. Caesar was a master of using coins, one of the first, I think, to use coins to really build his name. He completely appreciated the reach and the propagandistic power of coins to reach an audience. Especially when he was away from Rome, remember, for near a decade fighting his Gallic War. It was always a big problem for ancient leaders when they were away from their populace, when they were away from their state. And coins were the perfect way that they could carry on communicating with their people, with their followers, with their factions, make their cases for certain political ideals while they were away from their audience. So the events around the Ides of March were just a gift. They're just so wonderfully illustrated. That's what coins are in the end. It's an illustrated history just right there at your fingertips. So that was fantastic to write.
So the other side of the coin, pun intended, what was the hardest chapter for you to write? Which is the one that you went into it and you're like, oh, I know only a Wikipedia level of this?
The chapter about the first denarius was so fascinating because I really wanted to make that case, like I've said before, about the power and the historic weight of the first denarius and what it meant. The first denarius is struck around 211 BC, like I said, when Hannibal is at the gates of Rome. And what the denarius then went on to mean for economic history, really, the power of it. But to do that, I knew I had to bring to life the Punic Wars. Of course, it'd be like, trying to tell the story of World War I and World War II in a few thousand words. It's quite challenging. But my goal was always just to bring the coin to life, bring the context. What would it have been like for a Roman at that time holding that coin in their hand? What would it have meant to them? And to quickly give you the essentials of why that coin helped rescue Rome. This was the coin that saved Rome. I do argue their economy powered back very quickly. They were able to pay their soldiers. They were able to conduct international trade, which again strengthened Rome. And they were able to push Hannibal out of Italy, chase him back across the Mediterranean to what is now Tunisia, and defeat him outside his own city, really. So as soon as that coin was made, within a few years, you have the fight back. So, I think there was a connection there. So that was a large story to tell. I've always really been most fascinated and collected most at what I would say is the height of empire. So you're talking about those adoptive emperors. We're talking Trajan, Hadrian, to Marcus Aurelius, that zenith, that time when Rome really hits its peak. They're striking a huge amount of coins. Again, your listeners, very easy to get a lovely coin from that era because they survive in such astronomical numbers. So then looking at the fall of Rome, I really wanted to build my knowledge about what story the coins told in the fall of Rome. And it was difficult. The research, had to be done. But in the end, there's probably parts of the book that I'm the most proud of. So for instance, the journey of debasement, the destruction of Rome's money and the trust in Rome's money. Certainly on the surface level, the metal purity of the silver. Debasing is when you start to dilute the purity of your coinage with base metals, especially copper. And you start to basically conduct a monetary fraud against your own people. And I was just blown away. I always was aware of the process of debasement that happened to Rome's money. But one thing that came through in my research, I feel, was just that realization of how closely the fall of Rome could be charted in its money, or even vice versa, how much the destruction of Rome's money, I feel, was a direct cause of the fall of Rome. So that was just an exciting, difficult but exciting part of the book to bring to life for the reader.
Well, I think what I'm about to say might start a nerd fight, but we're just going to go with it. I think Augustus is the best Roman leader.
Okay.
Why am I 100% right? Somebody who has read a ton less Roman literature than you.
Yeah, I'm not going to fight you on that. I'm going to be there with you, I think, in a lot of respects. Absolutely. I did write about Augustus. One of my favorite chapters in the book is called Pax, and it's about the journey that Augustus went on from Octavian to Augustus and the first emperor and creating this remarkable beast, the Roman Empire. It is his creation. I'm with you. He is such a remarkable figure. The key thing about Augustus, let's remember, he's Julius Caesar's grandnephew. He is adopted after Caesar is assassinated, to his own surprise. He's away studying in what we would call university in what is now modern day Albania. He's surprised by a letter a week after the Ides of March, which was very speedy news back then, that the great Julius Caesar is assassinated and he has been named his main heir in his will. And, talk about someone rising to the challenge that's laid out before them by fate. This 19-year-old guy, obviously people might have grown up quicker back then, but, he's a young lad, and he is surprised by this news. And he doesn't have a choice. He's inherited Caesar's name, which is first and foremost very important. The loyalty of his soldiers. This is not a responsibility that he can say no to, really. Once that inheritance has gone through his competitors or Caesar's competition, they're going to want rid of him as well. When he comes to Rome later on, in the summer of 44 BC, as a 19-year-old, to come into that snake pit that is Rome, and pretty much, within 15 years to be the last one standing, to be the most powerful man in the known world, to have defeated all his rivals, and by 27 BC to be able to declare himself the sacred one, the revered one, Augustus, with no one to stand in his way anymore. This was a remarkable figure. You cannot doubt that. And he becomes this, on his coins, which are beautiful creations, he becomes this ageless demigod. You see the face of Augustus growing a little bit, or the face of Octavian, I should say, growing and maturing from his teenage years into the real face of the young man that we think he would have been recognized as in the Roman Forum. And then when he's declared Augustus in 27 BC by a very obedient Senate, his portrait freezes. That is it. It's an end of history moment. And he stays this kind of ageless demigod all the way through to his death in 14 AD, a remarkably long reign. He gathered all these powers carefully together and channeled them to his seat of power. But he did so in a way that was very mindful of what had happened to Caesar, to his great uncle. He was always very mindful of the Ides of March. And this is, again, another lovely bit of connectivity after the Ides of March, after Brutus. I can go to Augustus, his story, and he would have seen all the coins still circulating from the Ides of March and would have learned from them. And, one of the first things he does in 27 BC is formulate his Praetorian Guard, personal guard, that's going to ensure that the Ides doesn't happen again. Of course, it wouldn't last long, and they would become their own force of tyranny in the future as well. For most of Rome's history, he maintains his place as the longest reigning emperor. Eventually, Constantine will get him on that one. But just this remarkable long reign of, relative stability, the peace that he was able to offer tired, exhausted people at that time. He knew exactly what he needed to do as a leader. The Republic had been through a horrific period of civil war, multiple civil wars on top of one another, of course, from Sulla, really, from the civil wars of Sulla, very small breathing space, then into Caesar versus Pompey, again, then into Octavian and Mark Antony and Cleopatra, of course. So he knew his role. His role was to offer the people a form of peace, a peace that came at the expense of a lot of the people at the borders of his republic. I'll call it a republic for now. And he did it masterfully. And the coin I choose to illustrate that, of course, is a denarius with the first ever representation of the goddess Pax. And one of the first denarii he strikes after being declared a Roman emperor or imperator, Augustus, is a coin of Pax celebrating the goddess of peace. It's her first appearance on Roman coinage. And it's a beautiful coin that shows the goal of his reign, his manifesto. That is his manifesto that he's promising the people. You're going to have to sacrifice some rights. You're going to have to sacrifice those elections that we would partake in every now and then in the Republic. But I am going to give you all a form of peace. And he did that. It's a remarkable thing. Of course, that people are going to bring up the lost legions in Germania, and there was going to be battles at the edges of empire. Absolutely. But for the people within the empire, for the tens of millions of people in this new empire, this new creation, they were at that point so exhausted, they were willing to give over so many of their liberties, really, that had been fought for people like Brutus. They were willing to give those up at that point for the strong hand of Augustus. And he laid out the plan for the next 5 centuries, really, the model, the titles, the way things would be passed on. When he's dying without a son, he formulates the way that power can be passed by nominating his stepson Tiberius, and slowly, again, he was such an astute political player. He orchestrates a slow handover of powers. So before, one day that The people are bewildered, look around and realize they've got a whole new emperor, a whole new Augustus. In fact, he just passes on the name Augustus. And the poor people, they wouldn't have it was a very slow process. And just by the will of his long life, he was a very long-lived leader, and he was able to, again, orchestrate that evolution towards an empire. There's not really a day where they declare, right, everyone, this is the Roman Empire, but it was a slow process, a boiling of a frog, and he did it masterfully.
Now, I'm going to send you back in time.
Yes.
You're going to live in Rome. Which Roman leader do you want to live under? All right, I'm going to let you pick exactly where you want to end up.
Yeah.
During the time period covered by your book. Where are you picking?
Okay, I'm going to go back to... I know I'm going to go back to the reign of the Emperor Trajan. Okay, he was the first emperor of whose coin I received when I was young, and I then went on a little journey collecting the coins of Trajan. He's just such a popular emperor for having expanded the empire to its greatest extent around the year 100, and after his Dacian wars and the Persian, and he then is able to conquer the lands of Persia as well. He takes the empire to its maximum extent from Scotland to Iraq. But I would be most fascinated to live in the Rome of Trajan, to see a triumph of Trajan as he returns from his Dacian wars, to see his miraculous forum rise. If anyone's ever been to Rome and seen Trajan's column, which was at the heart of probably the greatest architectural complex built in the city of Rome, with his personal architect, Apollodorus. And it's been pretty wiped away by history, but the column still stands defiantly. To have wandered around his forum, to have seen the city at its height at close to 1 million people, to see the workings of that city, to see how it was administrated in a pre-modern world, how those people were fed, how unified the ideals were, and how the coins helped him to solidify his messages to the people. I would have been fascinated to see Rome at that period under the reign of Trajan. And another thing I point out in the book was that you had this remarkable intellectual flourishing at that time as well. A lot of the authors that people might know about from the ancient world, 100 AD, that year, there was this just incredible confluence, amazing parallels of all these writers living at once. So Tacitus was alive, Suetonius was working, Pliny the Younger was doing his writings, Apollodorus, who wrote architectural treatises as well. There was just this incredible intellectual flourishing that was encouraged by Trajan. In fact, Tacitus writes a passage and he says, I think he says it honestly, that he's so grateful at the start of his histories. He says, I'm so grateful to be living when I'm living, because I can say I can think what I want, and I can say what I think. And it's this a lovely sentiment he says at the start of his work, and then he embarks on his histories, and he's writing that about 100 AD, same time that Rome reaches its maximum extent. The military is at its height. Of course, there's going to be a turning point that comes up later in that century, but I think to see the workings of a city that was just completely dominant in 100 AD, I think I would go there. Yeah, that would be incredible, I think.
Well, listen, this has been great, Gareth, but I need to ask my final question for you.
Yeah.
Right? So we talked about it. Some people are like, oh, collecting coins, that's not cool. There was a subset of people who were like, oh, history is boring. It's a class I took in school. Now, you and I both know that all of these people are very poorly misguided. And if I sat one of those people in front of you and they said, history is boring, why should I read your book? Gareth, what would you say?
I would say that you're engaging in history every day through the ideas you bring to something, the way you react to something. The world is the way it is around you because of the workings, the laws, the philosophies established by the people, certainly, through the past, but absolutely within the Roman realm, where we have our language in the Western speaking world, again, our system of laws, our political ideas. So many of these things come from this fabric, this ancient Roman fabric that's interweaved through all our lives. Even outside of that, the main coin of commerce in the Middle East is the dinar, directly named after the denarius, which just had dominated world trade. There's just this incredible, again, interweaving of the ancient world into ours. And again, if you live in Europe or Britain, it is everywhere under your feet, that world, like this Alice in Wonderland world that just wants to be discovered. You just peel back the layers and the ancient world is there. And it's there to be interpreted, and it's just waiting to be found. So I just think history is remarkable in that respect. I think the other thing that has always brought me to history that is the power of humility. When you look at the expanse of time, when you look at the trials and tribulations that these people went through, when you look at the sacrifices, the heinous leaders and the virtuous leaders, I just think history, but the power of these artifacts to put you face to face with this history can give a comfort. You know, there's this comfort that comes from the classical world, but also a humility as well. Just to see yourself as this tiny little cog in this huge machine of history that is ongoing, that will carry on going once long after we're gone, you know, and then tie that in with maybe reading some of these, like Marcus Aurelius, of course. You know, I devote a chapter to him, and he's just got so many lovely ideas about how, even though he's the most powerful man in the world, you know, he's constantly telling us, you know, I'm just a tiny little speck. You know, I'm just a tiny little speck floating on a speck of dust, floating in the cosmos. It's just amazing, like the humble and stoic mindset that he has towards his position of power. But I think it just helps us see the scale of the world around us and start to realize that maybe our problems aren't the be all and end all. You know, these things have been going on since time immemorial. And it just fills me with wonder, of course, to traveling the ancient sites that are on these coins as well. It's an exciting thing to do. I've been to so many exciting places, so many incredible countries. Just a few months back, I was in Algeria in Northern Africa, you know, walking the streets of an abandoned Roman city, Timgad, and just thinking, you know, wow, these things are just there to be discovered. There's so many beautiful, by definition, they're often in the most beautiful places as well. It's just a world you can just throw yourself into. You can travel, you can explore, you can read. The ancient world is there for us all, and it'll welcome you, it'll challenge you, and it'll test the way you think you see the world, and often show you a lot of the things you think are intuitively the way things should be. It'll often show you that, you know, you might have been thinking about things the wrong way, or, you know, this thing happened before, it's got an echo in time, and maybe you could start to see things a different way. So yeah, the ancient world is there to test and challenge us and entertain us in every way.
Well, Gareth, I love the book. Thank you so much for coming on and talk about it.
Thanks, Brendan. Thanks for reading, and thanks for supporting.
And that's it for this episode. Gareth, thank you so much. A history of ancient Roman 12 coins. Go out and get it, people. Hit us up Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Don't forget the YouTube channel. Until next time, nerds, stay cool.